Hey now, it is Dan Aberhard here, today's host of the Growing the Future podcast. Thank you for joining me. We are on season 3, episode 16. Wowza, it's an impressive feat of survival. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and our socials. Give us a follow to catch the latest and greatest episodes and become a Growing the Future podcast insider at growingthefuturepodcast.ca. So you can sign up for our newsletter there and you can be the first to know when an awesome episode like what we're about to experience is going to come out. Today's episode is brought to you by GFL Agriculture, formerly known as Biocycle Solutions. Okay, this is a new division of GFL Environmental. GFL Ag is serious about their commitment to the agricultural industry with support from their parent company, GFL Environmental. Their mission is enriching the profitability and sustainability of modern agriculture. Get this, by using what we have to create more of what we need. I think it's common sense. We throw out half of what we produce as a human race. It's got to stop. It's got to stop. So they'll be offering farmers greater access to fertility solutions to run profitable operations. But the big thing is considering the environmental impact. And I think that'll be a little bit of the theme of the show here today as well. Aberhard Ag Solutions.ca is proud to be the master distributor for Canada for GF Agriculture. To learn more, you can go to gflenv.com or check out our socials or aberhardagsolutions.ca. I also want to give a huge shout out to our partners and friends at Replenish Nutrients. Replenish is famous for creating Super KS, Sustain, and Rebuilder. These regenerative soil health solutions give farmers an alternative to conventional products with the side benefit of improving soil quality for the long haul. At Replenish, they care about your soil. You can bet your roots on it. And don't forget, fall weather is a good time to apply phos and potassium to your soil. Fall fertilization increases shoot branching, winter survival, and overall plant density. I can tell you the fertilizer deals are pretty extraordinary this fall, folks. So let's get at it. Check them out at replenishnutrients.com. We're proud to be a sales channel for them as well. Now, on to the show. This week, folks, we had the opportunity to talk with an agronomist and crop researcher who's worked in the Saskatchewan arena for 20 years. She has an MSc from the U of S. It sounds like a rap song, like a little Prince of Bel-Air going on there. I should have rhymed this. She has an MSc from the U of S, specializing in pulse agronomy. She's the manager. So much power. She's got so much power at the Southeast Research Farm, a nonprofit, farmer-directed research and demonstration organization. She's also a mother of teenagers, a whole job in itself, and co-owns a small bison herd with her husband. I love it. The original animal, efficient animal of the prairies. Love it. Seriously, a woman of all trades and talents. I'm really excited to welcome the one and only Lana Shaw to the show. You can find Lana at Twitter at SE_researchfarm or visit her site at southeastresearchfarm.org. Lana, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Okay, so before we get it,
it's been a while. I've been promising to come on.
We have been talking about this for a really long time, and I've been following you on Twitter. I've been a big fan, and you said that you were, having fans is not, your ultimate goal, and maybe not totally what you're comfortable with, but surely there are folks that love what you're doing. And I have the quintessential question for you, but first I just want to know a little bit more about who you are and what you do to frame this conversation and what you guys do at Southeast Research.
I guess I describe myself as a big plant nerd. I know some people are really big soils nerds. I'm a big plant nerd that understands how important soils are to what you can ultimately grow. So I sort of see plants as an extension of the soil that and that's what we're trying to harvest. So I've been in agriculture in Saskatchewan for 20 years. I grew up on a farm at Darcy, Saskatchewan, if anyone knows where that is, west central Saskatchewan. And so I always brought that farm background with me when I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to work on. I'm not coming from I think it's an asset that I'm coming from that kind of a background because I can relate better to how farmers make decisions. That it's huge risk to make changes, and it's huge money, and I completely appreciate that and understand that. having grown up in, through 88, through years where there was crop failures going on, and one wrong step here or there means you don't have a farm anymore and your family has to move. So I grew up during that. So I've been at the Southeast Research Farm since 2010, and it started out as a really broke down, dysfunctional mess, and has grown into something that I'm very proud of at this point.
That's quite an accomplishment. Why should a farmer care about research?
I have this conversation sometimes with some of my family, like, they've been doing research for how many decades? Haven't they already finished doing the research? Can't you just let us get on with farming and do our own trials ourselves? Why don't you trust us to do our own trials? When I started as an agronomist in the irrigation districts near Outlook, I was young and fresh and just with the MSc and trying to go tell people with decades more than me of experience how to farm. But that really wasn't what I was doing. My approach was, I'm here to make myself useful to you. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to help you answer questions that you might have or bring up issues that you might not have thought of. So I'm here to make myself useful to farmers, not tell them what to do. And I don't know how many researchers are taking that approach, but it's always been mine, because you're not going to get anyone to listen to you showing up as a 24-year-old on a farm trying to tell a 50-year-old that they're doing something wrong. So it's just been 20 years of being a great big plant nerd and exploring new ideas and getting really excited about people trying new things. So I go and find farmers that are doing really cool things and then ask them lots of questions and amplify them and tell other people about what they're doing. So I've kind of become a catalyst for, yes, I do my own research trials, but I amplify cool things that other people are doing. So I'll go ask the farmers, what would I need to do a trial on that would be useful to you or useful to people that have a little less experience than you, that need to know how to do or grow X, Y, and Z. So we do research trials on monocrops for about 20 different species of crops at this research farm. So it's located at Redver, Saskatchewan. We're in the extreme southeast corner of Saskatchewan. So we're almost like honorary members of Manitoba and North Dakota here because we're that close. So we get some traffic and interest from outside of Saskatchewan here also because of that. So I think that gives you a little idea of, so I don't know if I answered the question, why research, but it's because I can answer questions more effectively and efficiently than a farmer can on their own. And just because you satisfy yourself that you've answered a question on your own farm doesn't mean that everyone else will be able to. Does everyone else have to go and do the exact trials that you've done in order to determine for themselves what they think they're going to do? By doing replicated trials, we can get much greater precision and repeatability and actual statistical analysis on that. We've got hugely variable environments, and so locations in the province vary vastly on soils and climate, and then you have year-to-year variability in weather that can make it really hard to determine, are you seeing a real effect, or was this just chance that something happened something weird happened one particular year? So by having multiple sites, multiple years, replication, statistical analysis, we can do things on a small scale to be an adjunct to farmers elsewhere. So that they can be doing their own trials concurrently, and that's great. It's better if we do have research trials and farmer field scale trials going on at the same time on the same subjects. And the other thing is, for some of our trials, we're collecting maybe 80 or 100 data points per plot on some of these trials. So, and then we're making, so some of my treatments, we have 22 different treatments for intercrop trials. So we're collecting thousands of data points on just one trial, analyzing them and determining what was consistent and what wasn't. That's not something that farmers have the training or the time to go and do that level of detail. And that's not even including all the analyticals that we're sending a lot of this stuff for at the end of the year. We're sending samples for analysis, and we're able to get funding from various sources to pay for all of that rigor and analysis. So I think that's kind of a long answer, but I really do feel there's value in what I'm providing to farmers. If I didn't think that what I was doing was useful and it was just self-serving to keep myself employed, I would probably go find something else to do.
Absolutely. I'm glad you have so much purpose. What I'm wondering is, you're talking, if I was a farmer and I came to you and I said, look, regionally, we're close enough together that, obviously some of the research assumptions can be adopted practically on my farm. Mm-hmm. And I said to you, Lana, I want to be on the bleeding edge, but I don't want to bleed out. And I love collaborating with folks like yourself. What is the optimum mix of research via your practices, via my on-farm mix, like doing trials myself, testing out and implementing things, and actually implementing things? Like, if I was to submit myself to you as a guru in this sense and say, Lana, what should I be doing? Working with you, working on my own farm to optimize and implementing. What's the best configuration you've seen?
It's a little hard to answer. One of the projects that we had recently was a PO intercrop project we had between General Mills and us. And we had small plot trials going on here, and then General Mills instigated some on-farm kind of strip trials where people were doing a PO intercrop on at least 20 acres and plain oats on at least 20 acres. So we had the small plots going concurrently with that. And 40 acres it's a bit of bother, but it's not so much area that you can't manage it if something goes not very well. I've heard people say that that there's some percentage of their operation that they should be allocating to research and development. And if that's a percentage of your acres, that you can say, I'm going to take more risks on these acres, and the vast majority of the acres, I'm sticking with things that I know will put money in the bank. Maybe that's 10%, maybe it's 5%. I don't know. And it depends just how bleeding edge you want to be. I think you can take some risks and be more adventurous on pick a field that's close to home and make that your experiment field. I think some of the people that are doing really exciting things have taken that approach, that they're going to keep doing those trials on farm and taking the time, realizing that it's not going to be a win all the time. It's not. If you only ever try things that you're sure will work, you're probably going to be missing out on some opportunities. So you try them in a controlled way. You try them in a way that you can afford to fail at. And then have backup plans, have a plan B and a plan C.
Yeah, I'm wondering what the good, the bad, and the ugly of innovation really is. Is there too much innovation going on in some places? Is there not nearly enough? Are we in the sweet spot? What's the Goldilocks range here?
There's people, there's certainly examples, and nobody I would name, and nobody specific comes to mind, but I've heard of some train wrecks where I think, oh, you should have tried that on a smaller scale before you went with 2,000 acres of that. And so, like growing chickpea flax up by Prince Albert, I'm fully supportive, will help anyone that wants to try doing that. I will help you do it the best way you can, but I am not going to exactly encourage it. I'm not going to try to convince anyone to do some of the things. So there's a scale where I think, oh, that's, good odds, that's going to work out okay for you. And there's at another end of the scale, it's like, okay, best of luck. Tell me how that turns out. Here's all the things that I think would probably are probably going to trip you up on that. But if you want to do it, I'll try to help you the best way I can. So I try to arm people with the best advice that I can give them at the time, because for things where they are trying to intercrop or cover crop or whatever, any failures, especially large failures, is basically a black eye on the techniques we're trying to implement. That's how I see it. So if somebody is going off and doing something that really does not work well, then it kind of gives a bad flavor to the other ones that are doing it successfully. So I think that's partly why a lot of these people doing soil health and intercropping and cover crops are so willing to help other people, because all the failures it's like they count double against the concept compared to everyone that's doing it relatively successfully. So that's my approach.
If we were in a support group and you were the leader of the support group and I was in the support group and I said, my name is Dan Eberhard and I'm a degenerative farmer and I want to be regenerative, but I don't know how. How would you start fixing me, Lana?
So aside from the fact that, a degenerative farmer, I think is not something anyone would define themselves as. But if you are sitting there realizing that your soil is your greatest asset that you literally own, and it's being gradually degraded through some means, or you come to believe it's being gradually degraded and want to try to build it, then you look at things like, how much soil disturbance are you doing? How much protection is there for your soil to prevent erosion? How much is there any fallow periods? Where are the pinch points or the problem points where you're experiencing soil erosion, experiencing losses of nutrients into the atmosphere, or losses of carbon due to the things not going well. I think one of the points where I got a bit enthusiastic about soil health was, you would remember 2011, right?
Yep.
We were all flooded out.
Yep.
In this part of the world. So 2011, there was loads and loads of fallow soil. Between 2011 and 2014, there was a lot of wet fallow in this southeast part of the world. And, so people were just dealing with that, with going out and doing tillage. And I could just watch the soils going backwards, because you're losing carbon by having those soils sit bare and wet and being tilled, or even being just sprayed. They were, waterlogged and becoming saline, becoming a mess. That's what one of the periods of time that got me more fired up, that soils are something that needs living roots in it. They need to be they're alive. And if they're sitting there with nothing growing in them, that they're basically starving, that the biology in them is cannibalizing itself. It's eating the carbon that's in the soil. That's what
this is an interesting discussion, looking at the spectrum from like reducing the quality of our soils to maintaining them to improving them on a macro level. In your opinion, where is the needle? Because a lot of the conversation right now is, well, are we not sustainable now? Like, the farm's been around for 100, 150 years. Where's the needle on the spectrum right now?
If you talk to soil scientists, we are losing soil. We're not, like, literally topsoil is going away. It is going away at a slower rate than it was when we were tilling. Absolutely, full stop. It's going away at a slower rate than when we were doing fallow. Fallow and tillage were degraded soils very, very badly. So, we've put a pretty good bandage on the wound of, that's my sort of visual on that. We've finally, put a bandage on it, but there's still losses. There are still people going out and doing fall tillage, lots of fall harrowing, fall working ground, and somehow justifying that as a good thing for their soils, when the soil scientists do not support that at all. I'm not sure why they think that is a good idea. I don't. During the wet years, people were doing a lot to try to get their soils dry enough to actually plant, but most likely causing a great deal of compaction along the way. We think of our soils as resistant to compaction because of the freeze-thaw cycle, but it's all relative. We still can cause compaction even in our freeze-thaw soils. So I think there's room for improvement. Just because it could be worse doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement.
So a guy like my brother, what are the top 3 things that you would recommend that he do to move that needle from loss to growth and soil health and retention and profitability and production?
So I'd have to know more about where he's at right now. So if I get calls from people, what should I be doing? If I was talking to Terry. So what is your rotation right now? What are those points where you've got longer periods of fallow? Like, if you're growing a winter cereal, well, that's a good thing. But is there something you could plant after your winter cereal to fit in a cover crop after a winter cereal? Maybe you underseed some oats to clover or something, or you underseed something so that you've got some living, a sub-story or a underseeded something that doesn't cost an enormous amount, that you seed with your main crop that will grow into the fall. I think when we're talking about black soil zone, it's not unreasonable to think we can grow something intentionally have something providing living roots going into the freeze up season. Whether that's something you want still growing in the spring or not is another question. You might be giving up spring moisture if you've got, say, a fall rye or something growing in the spring and you're going to go plant canola into it. That you might lose too much moisture. And Yvonne Lawley's and some of the University of Manitoba research on cover crops has found that the date of termination, and I think even some of the work in North Dakota, the date of termination is important. When in the spring, if you have let's say you have a cover crop that's growing through the fall and still growing in the spring, if you can kill it really quick in the spring and go seed, then sometimes that can be okay. So I think Terry had tried some intercropping. I would be, happy to brainstorm with people on what else could you try intercropping? What do you wish you could grow that you're not currently growing? What do you have for a rotation now? Can you fit some kind of a flax intercrop in there, or grow sunflowers underseeded to something? So when I'm talking about these techniques, it's usually trying to find a way to add in a little bit more diversity in places where it's low-hanging fruit, where there seems to be an opening.
Why aren't more people doing this? What is the bottleneck?
The research on it has only fairly recently got going. We've got sort of a culture that thinks that having one species in a field in a given year is optimal, and more than one species means you have a problem, you have a weed, you have a volunteer situation. And reality is more complex than that. There may be areas of the Palliser Triangle where having something growing in the fall is going to cost you yield in the spring. But I think there's parts of Saskatchewan where that's not necessarily the case. So I think there's a lot of assumptions that that we've been going with of what a proper what a proper field looks like. That it has very little diversity in a given year. You could have diversity across a some diversity over time, but you still have very, very little spatial diversity in a given year in a field. So it's a mindset change to say, well, maybe that's good to have more than one species in a field and that you don't have control over it. We strive to, have as much control as possible over agriculture, over our fields, because of how little control we have over the weather. And some of these techniques is releasing some of that control that we do still have, because just because you plant 2 crops or a cover crop or something doesn't mean it's a predictable outcome. It's still pretty unpredictable what is going to happen. And that's an uncomfortable feeling until you really get used to that your control is kind of an illusion.
Control is kind of an illusion. Interesting statement. I'm wondering, with all the variability in this, it seems like the answers are like agronomists often answer a question, which is, it depends, which, as a sales guy, it's like drives me nuts, because I'll ask my brother agronomic question about something that I want to be able to answer. And it's like, well, it depends. Well, can you simplify that and make it broader for everybody so we can get at this on a large scale?
It's a hard, I think it's not just that agronomists are trying to, make sure that they have jobs. The researchers are trying to make sure they have jobs so they won't tell anyone how to do things. It's that what we're trying to do is really complicated. Like as soon as you think you've got a system that works, evolution dictates that all of a sudden you have a new weed to deal with, or you have some new issue that starts popping up. So you're always having to deal with some new challenge. Some of the, like Derek Axton, one of the intercroppers that's been at it for a long time, has some very different challenges now than he did when he first started, but he still has challenges. He still has, he has issues now with maintaining enough residue cover on his fields because, it gets turned over so quick by all his earthworms. Or he's got different weeds now, a totally different weed spectrum now than he did before he was doing some of this stuff. So you always still have some problems that you're going to deal with. I think of agriculture as more of like a craft than just a recipe. It's something that you're always tweaking, and you don't control everything. There's surprises. I've been working at this research farm for over 10 years, and every year it's like, well, I didn't know that was going to happen. That caught me by surprise. Like there was a herbicide residue issue this year that I didn't figure out. That's what was the problem until well into the season. And not that there's something I could have done to anticipate it necessarily, but there always seems like there's something new that we're figuring out.
Yeah. Where do you see this going? I mean, there's so much talk about it. There's so much space dedicated into the Western Seducer. There's, everybody's talking, but I don't see a lot of people doing anything.
Yeah. It takes a while to turn a ship. That's my theory on this. Like talking to Colin Rosengren, he's been doing this for a long time, this intercropping and some all of this. It takes decades to take something from a few innovators trying something to it being wide scale adopted when it's as complicated as this. And I think no-till is one of the best analogs because it took decades for that to be adopted. And it took decades for the farmers to stop saying, no, tillage is good for my soil and I'm going to keep, the fallow is good and I need to let my land rest. And your people's fields are ugly and you're just lazy and you don't want to do tillage. That's what was going on when I was young among the farmers. Right. And then we've gradually realized that there was a generational change. There was a mindset change that stubble on fields is good and dirt blowing on bare fields is bad. But there's a social aspect to that that is resistant to change. That people's definitions of what is a good field and what is a bad field, or
Right.
what is a good field condition, that takes time to change.
Yeah. That is the definition of being, successful and productive. When I think about it, growing up, was that tabletop crop of wheat, you know, monocrop, like everything the same height, the same heads, like just perfectly grown like a factory. So that's a pretty big shift. So I guess that's a good segue into your endeavors with the Nuffield Scholarship recently, and you were looking at the topic of viral ideas, which is really interesting considering what's going on in society. Either way, there's a lot of I don't know if it's a word, but virality going around. That's very powerful. Uh, Ideas have power, and they spread like a virus, good and bad. What were you wanting to really get under the hood with in your endeavors with the Nuffield Scholarship topic?
So I wanted to look at the whole regenerative ag, soil health, sustainable ag space, and how those ideas are spreading, and how what that means for extension. Like, we have an old extension model that says, like, research people do research, and then they communicate that to their agronomists and extension agents, who then go and inform farmers, and it's a one-way flow of information, basically. And I think that whole idea is rather broken. I don't think you'll find a lot of farmers that are that keen on it. It's a conversation. It's more of a big loop. What actually works is a great big loop. And the only reason that I'm relevant is because I realize that I need to be in the loop with the farmers, and that I need to be a conduit of all of that information to the more rigorous research community, to all the people that have the proper government and university positions. So I wanted to understand better how there are a few people like Abby Wick and the resource people, Yvonne Lawley, different ones that are kind of like a focal point for facilitating learning and farmer adoption and farmer trialing and farmer testing and experimentation. I wanted to understand how I fit in that ecosystem. I think of it like an ecosystem of ideas, and I don't fully understand how I fit in the ecosystem. I know I'm in there, but I don't, in order to figure out what I'm doing, I feel like I need to understand better how that works. How is it working in other areas? What am I doing that is effective, so that I can keep doing that and not do something that's going to derail what I'm doing that is effective.
Oh man, I have so many questions. It's like knowledge. Like, the more that you know, the more you realize you don't know, the more complicated it gets. It's like illuminating a space in the dark in a cave. There was some famous philosopher, I think, that had that thesis where, the bigger the flame of the fire inside the cave, the more you can illuminate the boundaries, less Like, I mean, the edge of our understanding just continues to expand in any direction that we go. It's vastly more complicated than we think. I didn't even know there was. I didn't even know the soil was alive when I was growing up. Dad just put stuff on it and plants came up. And here we find
Yeah,
out, well,
like
plants
we were.
are a result of the evolution of bacteria that came out of the ocean that is reaching for the sun. Like, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know much at all about soil biology, having gone through for a crop science degree at U of S, about undergrad, and then a master's with a specialization in, or a minor in soil. I had a minor in soils in my undergrad, and quite a bit of soils in during my master's. And we learned about soil chemistry and soil physics, but I didn't have a class on soil biology. I knew that there was bacteria required to convert fertilizer to something that plants could use, or that there's bacteria involved in taking the fertilizer nutrients and turning them into, releasing them into the atmosphere and making them go away. But that was largely the extent of the soil biology knowledge that I had. And I think that's unfortunately true for a lot of the crop agronomy training, that we don't know that much about the processes. And there has been changes in understanding of soil biology and how organic matter is formed. There's been a shift into thinking that it's all the straw that just gets incorporated, and part of it gets broken down into stable organic matter. But what they're finding more recently is that it's microbial biomass that forms the most of it. So it's all the things that are that's the soil biology, the carcasses of the soil biology that ends up being your organic matter. And that plants are actually releasing sugars through their roots to the soil. And there's things in the soil that are surviving off of that. And that is contributing to the organic carbon that's stable in the soil. That's a new concept, relatively.
And it's the truth. It's the truth. Where do you see use of sort of the chemical construct that we've been relying on to produce such fantastic yields and feed the earth? Like, to me, it's an exact parallel with oil. Like, God bless oil and the Haber-Bosch process and everything that got us to the sophisticated society that we could be tweeting while we're driving through Starbucks, getting our $7 whatchamacallit Italian thingamajiggers. It's an incredible society that's all dependent. Like, everything is made from oil. Everything is dependent on Haber-Bosch, And yet, why should we care? What does it matter? Why can't we just keep doing what we're doing? Like, what are the consequences? What are the implications of continuing wholesale broadcasting of synthetic fertilizer and chemicals and reduction of diversity? Like, why do you care? What's the big picture? Is there consequence? You think there's going to be consequences?
I think there's consequences from society that's saying you need to be part of the solution and stop being so much part of the problem. And they're voting at the grocery store. They're one of the biggest growth markets is people wanting to use their grocery money to influence the environment that's outside of the cities. That's just reality. Yeah. Like, they want more biological diversity. They don't want the biological diversity of out in the country where there's the pushing bush that's going on. Is I don't have to drive very far to see a whole lot of pushing bush where people are they're pushing bush and draining land on their land so that they can farm corner to corner and try to achieve that goal of having one species of plant on their entire field. The trouble with that is that it's not achievable in the long term. To be able to maintain that herbicide resistance is kicking us in the butt. The fungal resistance to fungicides is already here. It's so over-reliance on all of those the chemicals, the herbicides. You're dealing with a biological system that's complex and treating it as though it's simple. That comes back to bite you. And for clubroot, people going around and people growing canola continuously or every second year. I'm sure there's the canola acres are up this year because of $20 an acre, $20 a bushel canola. That I don't think is sustainable. I have, but there's such a push to, when I started in this area, growing 2-year rotations. The 2-year rotations isn't a rotation. I've likened it to sitting on a 2-legged stool. Just because you can do it doesn't mean everyone should be supporting you doing it and trying to figure out why you keep falling down. Like, you need more stability, and our ag system needs more stability than that. So I think there's people that realize that they will get more out of their system, that they will get more out of their land, that they will get more money by embracing more diversity. And if they weren't getting more money by doing these things, then they wouldn't still be doing them. They're not doing it for love of soil. They're doing it because they can see value in building their asset of their soil. And seeing that exactly how you do it is tricky, and you don't succeed all the time, and it's not extremely rapid. It's not like you can do one thing and then immediately measure, oh, I've got this much more productivity. But if there's enough people that are seeing more resilience in their soils by treating them as though they're a living environment, that's why it is catching on and going ahead. I think in these days where I believe in climate change, and that's one of the big pressures to making soils more resilient, to be able to store water more effectively and not having it running off. I think there are problems with some of the low diversity systems where the water is not being absorbed adequately because there's not enough of the earthworms and the soil biology to create that soil sponge. And if you have water running off and laying in your low spots, then you have to go and drain those. Well, that's water that's not being absorbed into your field, where it could do some good in July. If your heavy rains in June have a great deal of that has run off, then it's not available to your crops in July when it's filling grain. So I think there's potential for increasing yields by improving soils.
What is the metric? Like, as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, our family farm is indeed going to be pushing some bush, and with the value of land, it's economically, undeniably, one of the better things you could do is buy some piece of shit land and fixer upper. In our metric, looking at the land is, well, this is wasteland. It's not doing anything. We're going to make it into something that produces dollars and feeds the world and everything. But what is the metric? Because you could argue my brother is doing zero till forever and a day. He's variable rating all the nutrients. He's got all the modern equipment that only puts chemical and fertilizer where it needs to go. He's working with drones and artificial intelligence to only spray the weeds. I mean, we're not quite there yet, and he's using low salt sort of regenerative ag fertility that we're involved with. It's not the manufactured high salt index fertilizers and stuff like that. And can we argue that if his organic matter and his organic carbon is going up in the soil, it's regenerative? Are we smoking something?
It's good. I don't know, if I'm not the arbiter for what qualifies as regenerative.
Who is? Can we talk to them?
I think if you're no one, if you are taking measures to increase the organic matter and soil biology, then in some sense you're at least practicing some of those regenerative ag principles, like no disturbance in the soil, and there is some of those principles that are at play, and most people don't use all of those kind of principles all the time every year. So I'm not saying, and no one will have me recorded as saying anything that is a bad system.
Yeah.
Is there things that we could talk about trying that might be really, really good? Yes, but that's my plant nerd, just enthusiasm for things that comes out. I'm not against using fertilizers and chemicals. And I know a lot of people in the regenerative ag space are. I'm not against using phosphate fertilizers. I think that the nitrogen fertilizers can be reduced considerably by using some of these, the intercrops that we've been doing. We can grow, let's say, pea oats on field scale with very little added nitrogen. We've got a trial going on currently where we're comparing half rate nitrogen, quarter rate nitrogen, and I think even like, down to almost 10% of what a normal nitrogen rate would be for some of these intercrops, to see like, can we have a productive system that is really good, but with far less nitrogen being added as an input, and how does that work out economically? Like, it all comes down to dollars and cents. If it works out with no subsidization, great. If there's an economic advantage without somebody having to say, here's a money for doing a thing we want you to do, great. Is there possibly going to be there's likely to be opportunities for people to get some money, to be incentivized for planting cover crops, because society wants you to sequester more carbon than what you're currently doing. So if somebody came along and was like, here's $20 an acre to plant clover in your oat crop, or Italian ryegrass in your oat crop or something, then it's up to people to decide, okay, is that something that fits in my business model? It all comes down to being a business model. So there are likely to be opportunities that way that are both good for the long term of agriculture and good for, in a business sense, for farms.
2 more questions from me, and then we want to get to some producer questions, because that's really what this is about. If I attended your workshop, hopefully you'll be having more in the future, what would be my single greatest takeaway, or the theme that I'll leave thinking, or the thing I might want to change when I leave there?
I think people usually come away from some of those intercropping events just feeling empowered to go try things, and I can't say what exactly they might come up with, but and then also just making connections to other people that they feel like they can reach out to. So I think it's just having more confidence and comfort level with the some of the uncertainties and the sort of adventure of it, because people are genuinely really excited about what they're doing, and it gets to the point where they're trying like 10 different things, 10 different intercrops on all these fields, and then they go, okay, this is getting way out of control, I need to pick some winners and scale it back. They're having a lot of fun doing what they're doing, and making good money doing what they're doing, but they would have to pick the economic winners, or the ones that are most feasible for what they're attempting. But I think embracing diversity and really getting that soil is your asset, and it's actually an environment full of living things that can either be your friend or they can be killing your plants. Like, soils can be full of biology that's killing your plants. They can be full of biology that's helping them, or at least helping to direct water where it needs to go, or recycle nutrients, or something of that sort. So that's I hope what people would come away with.
Good. Okay, one last question. It's wide open. Take it wherever you want. What is your general thesis of the universe?
I like diversity, and diversity in agriculture and all kinds of other things. I think that's, if somebody was to describe me, I think that it's kind of a running theme in my life, that I just like trying lots of things. So if I go have craft beer, I try all the things, and I'm never going to be found drinking the same drink in a row more than once, because I like to try all the things. And it's probably one of the good reasons that I don't literally have a farm, because I would try all of the things and probably not make very much money doing it, because there's a limit to how efficient diversity is, for a business sense. So fortunately, I run a research farm where I can do all kinds of things at kind of a crazy level of diversity. So I guess that's my final answer.
Well, I hope we get an opportunity, at some future trade show in person to do some intercrafting beer. I think that's a new term we just made up. Intercrafting. Okay, so This, I wish this was like a 7-part series, and I think, I don't know. Because, I mean, we could talk about all kinds of crazy stuff, like what you actually learned this year, and it's just endless. It's really bugging me. But the reality is I want to get to producers' questions, so we're going to go to the Twitter, the Ag Twitter, hashtag Ag Twitter segment next, and hear from producers, and I'll get you to answer their questions as succinctly as you can. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Okay.
Let's go there now.
I like the Twitter people. I'm.
We love the Twitter people.
I think
You're
it's a
big Twitter
useful.
person.
I love the Twitter people.
They're going to have their questions here shortly, so stay tuned. So we want to answer these questions, starting with Paige Stewart. Hey, Paige, how's it going? What, if any, were the unforeseen costs of switching to intercropping?
I think it's actually grain storage that people don't think of, maybe. Like, yeah, they know they have to have a separation equipment. But when you're, you have to have storage for your mixed grain and then somewhere to put the things that you're separating out. And, then you're going to have some bit of where your dockage or whatever, you're going to have to put your dockage somewhere. And if you're intercropping generally results in people growing more total crops. So therefore you're going to need to keep them all in separate space. I think if I was pressed, that would be what I would say is storage.
Love it. That probably speaks to Joel Hagee's question. Costs of separating and marketability of the crops. Pea/oats are a common one, but many mills won't buy the oats if there's too many splits in them.
Yes. So that's something that you need to give some thought before you even plant the crop. There's good odds that there's going to be some bits of one crop in your other crop. Find out who you can sell that to before you even put it in the ground. So this isn't something people should undertake and just decide willy-nilly in April that they're going to do this. So there's some grain companies that don't mind some. Grain Millers was one that had very little tolerance for split peas in their oats, whereas Patterson didn't mind as much. So talk to your grain buyers and see what issues they're going to have maybe before you put the stuff in the ground, and figure out, can you actually separate the stuff, including broken bits of crop, before you put it in the ground. Because it's a lot better to figure it out before you seed it than after you've harvested it, whether or not you can adequately separate it.
Great advice. Great advice. Ron Cron asks, what is the goal of cover cropping, specifically on the nutrient side? I understand more organic matter and water infiltration. Pardon me. If it is to have the soil to be more healthy, so it makes more nutrients available so we can apply less fertilizer, are we still not just mining the soil?
Okay. If we're talking nitrogen, no, then we're not mining soil. We can produce nitrogen through nitrogen fixation, and cover crops are capable of doing that. Some of them are. If we're talking phosphorus, that is an interesting controversy that is, I don't want to get into too much. But yes, there's some of the cover crops maybe making that nutrient more available, but there's nothing saying that you can't keep adding phosphorus with your grain crops. We're exporting grain, exporting phosphorus. I don't think it's a bad idea to find a phosphorus source to replace that. And there's all kinds of different phosphorus sources, including some that are derived from effluent. So pick your phosphorus source and go carry on.
Good point. Good point. Devin Walker asks, how to intercrop without soil pathogen and disease buildup? Clubroot, Phanomyces, Fusarium. Continuous croppers are stretching rotations further all the time. Intercropping appears to stack problems, not space them out. Darn it. Seems counterintuitive.
This is a question I get almost every time I do an intercropping talk. And fortunately, I've been, as an agronomist of 20 years, I'm very well aware of soil pathology issues, and literally doing trials on Phanomyces, multiple research trials on Phanomyces right now with Sham Chatterton. So not all pulses are hosts of Phanomyces. So peas and lentils are, a lot of the other pulses are not. So if you can space out those pulses in your rotation while still intercropping, then you don't have to have peas every other year. That's not anything I recommend to people, even if they're trying to convince me it's a wonderful idea. Obviously, they're going to do what they want to do, but it's just a more complex way of thinking about rotations. Instead of saying, oh, we can only have one pulse every 4 years. Well, maybe you only have peas every 4 years or every 6 years, but that doesn't mean that's the only pulse that you can have in that 4 or 6 year time period. So you could have chickpeas, you could have fava beans, you could have some other pulses. And the same goes for oil seeds. There's nothing saying you can only have one kind of an oil seed in a 4 or 6 year rotation. You could have a flax and canola in the same rotation. You just have to be really careful about volunteers and not having, obviously, a flax and canola intercrop, involuntary intercrop is problematic for separation reasons. So it's manageable is kind of what I would say on that.
Oof, I feel like I need a whiskey or something here. Dale Steele says, where does the researcher do their field work? I mean, obviously we've covered that, southeastern Saskatchewan, but I mean, the point is, then ask them what they think is the minimum in-season rainfall required for success. Too often, Lana, the headlines lack regional detail and context, darn it. Adopting, sorry for like imposing my tone onto these questions. I'm trying to capture. Too often the headlines lack regional detail and context. Adopting ag practices from Kentucky may produce different results in Palliser Triangle. We got to put the sticker on regenerative ag here. Anyways, take it away.
So I agree. There's some techniques like the relay cropping that is really cool and awesome in some other places. I don't think it has a fit here. I am literally doing trials in southeast Saskatchewan, and that's the only place I have a research farm, so it's the only place I do my research. But I am involved in multi-site trials where we have locations in the Palliser Triangle. We have there's trials and intercropping trials being done in Swift Current. Is it done everywhere in the Palliser Triangle? No, but there are locations. It is being evaluated in quite dry sites or in typically dry sites. Some of the locations that would be doing intercropping trials the last few years were at least dry in those years. Like last year, we were actually quite dry. So we've had quite wet seasons and quite dry seasons where intercropping is being evaluated. As far as cover crops, like black soil zone and dark gray soil zone are probably much more feasible and much easier to pull that off than in brown soil zone. Dark brown is maybe more possible, but still, you're still much more moisture limited. So, but as far as intercrops, like Axtons and Cody Straza, there's people in some very dry areas that have been intercropping for quite a few years successfully that think that it's an advantage. That having, just because you've got more than one species of crop doesn't mean that the moisture limitation is a really big problem. They may be seeing advantages still, even under very moisture limited conditions. I think they've tended to do is just drop the seeding rates a little bit. So we're not overseeding so much. So dropping the seeding rates and lowering the densities of both the crops so that it's just manageable.
Well, I'm glad we're not discriminating against people in the brown zones, because that wouldn't be right. Everybody can have a little bit of taste of them. We love them too. Jared Gus says, define sustainable. Both environmental and economic. I'm still looking for the same answer of any two people. And I chimed in, hey, sustainable maintains and regenerative improves. I hate those words. As a marketer, as a human being. It's like, oh, get me out of this conversation. But you mean if we don't use words, how do we impart our ideas and do the same things?
Yeah. So those words have quite diverse meanings depending on who is using them. But I think you were right about sort of the emphasis behind a sustainable is to try to make sure that your system isn't deteriorating. But some of the ideas originally behind sustainable agriculture was social sustainability. also, and what's happening to your rural communities, what's happening to the environment. Like, yes, things need to be economically sustainable, but we farm in an ecosystem of ideas and programs and all of that. I don't think just being focused on one year over another profits as the driver for your sustainability of your farm should be the be all end all. I don't think that is sustainability. Yes, economics has to be part of what ensures the long-term continuity of agriculture. If anything has driven me in the last 20 years, it is a vision for the long-term continuity of a healthy agriculture in the province. And all of my great-grandparents homesteaded in Saskatchewan, and my family still farms at Darcy and has been on the same land for over 100 years. That I want agriculture to be successful for another 100 and 200 years, and for farmers to be, happy to be out farming in 100 years from now. So, and to have happy, good communities and families that are happy to be there. That is sort of a larger context of sustainability that I want to see.
Jason McNamee from Lucent Biosciences asks, how do you define soil health? You should listen to his episode, by the way.
I don't know
it would be very interesting.
I should. I don't know if I can or should. But maybe it's more useful to define unhealthy and relative to healthy. And I think unhealthy soil is one that's actively killing plants or that's disappearing down the creek. Or that is becoming unable to absorb water effectively. Like I can say I have seen unhealthy soils. I have planted things into unhealthy soils that I am, kind of grieving the state of them. And I think all of those can be improved over time. So it is all relative. Infiltration rate and farmers being able to do an infiltration rate test on their own is one of the most impactful measures of whether or not your soil is functional. So I like the word functional and improving functionality more so than healthy versus not healthy. So if your water infiltration rate is improved, that's a really good indicator that your soil is more functional. There's a whole bunch of soil biology and chemistry and everything that goes into improving the infiltration rate of your soil. But it's a really easy thing to do yourself. Pound a pipe into the ground and pour water in it, and then do it again a couple of years later. And it's a legitimate soil physics technique that they'll do. So that's my approach on soil health. As a plant nerd, if soils are functional, then they grow fantastic plants. And that's just an indicator of that you have a functional soil.
Jay Schultz, Wheatlander Jay, you probably know him on Twitter. What has been your worst experience growing intercrops, Lana?
I've had lots of experience, and some of it bad. And I always think that me learning something that didn't work is terrifically useful. So therefore it's kind of good. But some of the things where I would say this is really not very good was like I had a pea canola trial where we had bad Aphanomyces, and so the peas were having a fail. They were barely growing in the understory of the canola. The canola was growing okay, but because we seeded it at a relatively low rate and didn't fertilize it, it was a very sad canola crop with a very sad pea crop growing underneath it. And the peas were ripe a month before the canola. That was not a good scenario. And now, what I didn't realize was that there had been peas on that field 2 years previous, and I didn't know that there was an Phantomyces problem on that field. So if I had known that, I wouldn't have put that trial there. So that one kind of kicked me in the butt a bit, but we learned things, and we definitely learned that intercropping is no magic solution to a Phantomyces. The peas growing on their own were also terrible. So the pea monocrop was not good, but the canola monocrop was just fine. It had, if it was seeded at normal rates and fertilizers, then it was just fine. So, the intercrop was really not a win in that situation, but, we learned things.
Interesting. Darren Peters, this just came in. Have you ever done a total nutrient analysis of your soil and subsoil below? I did. And I believe we have loads of nutrients in our soil and massive amounts in subsoil that would be available once plants and microbiology access / turn it into topsoil.
I am not a soil scientist. I understand there's very complicated nuances on forms of phosphate and how this is a particularly a phosphate and maybe a potash question, because that's the one where they're saying, well, you don't need to fertilize for phosphate because total phosphate is abundant in agricultural soils. And I fertilize most of ours with phosphate, or at least they're planted on soils that are regularly fertilized with phosphate. So I don't know. I'd need to defer to soil scientists on a lot of that. It's out. It's out of my wheelhouse, and I'm okay with that.
It depends. Just say it depends.
It depends. I'm a scientist, and it's not my specialization.
Shannon Selinsky.
I defer.
Yeah. We'll have another episode with a soil scientist. Shannon Selinsky asks, can you build a Lego soil profile?
I have Lego at home still. My teenagers have outgrown Lego recently, couple of years ago. In theory, yes. But I need Lego earthworms. I'm not sure how I'd manage that.
But there's a lot of other really great.
Exactly what the question meant.
Yeah, it's just a funny one. Don't worry about it. Hey, there's a lot of other nuances going on in the thread here, conversations. You should jump in there if you like. It seems like a lot of people are.
Well, I'll jump in. I don't think it
has
has to be a mystery that it was. I don't think it has to be a mystery that it was me you're interviewing. So I might jump in there this afternoon, or this evening.
I feel like if I keep it anonymous, people are more apt to throw things out there. I feel like if they know who I'm. Not that it's a huge deal in life. I mean, the implications are relatively small on the impact of humanity. But I feel like if as a matter of importance, but I feel like if I let them know who the guest is, then it sort of colors the whole thing. So it's like just a random, kind of like somebody's coming on to talk about this. The final question was that I was going to throw out there was, are you double vaccinated? But you know what? I don't even want you to answer, and it's nobody's business. And that's not a conversation we're going to have on Growing the Future podcast at this point. But God bless Trusted Sarah from Trusted Marketing asked it. And if you want to know the Lana's answer, you can go on my Twitter and see it. But we're not going there on the show. But Lana, incredible. We finally connected. We got going on the conversation. I feel like it's just starting, and I don't know, it's endless fodder for conversation. But I really appreciate what you're doing. And, I guess I think about research a lot as somebody who's bringing products to the market, and this particular space too of, things that make the soil better, things that make our business better, things that make our health and our lives better. That's becoming more and more a theme of my life. And I love the theme of your life, diversity, that you talked about. Thanks for coming on the show, Lana. Where could people get a hold of you if they want to reach you?
Twitter.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way. Yeah. because probably most of your audience is
That's
on
how we did
Twitter
it.
anyway. So
Yeah, they are.
yeah. So and we
Yeah.
have a website, southeastresearchfarm.org, and but the best way to get a hold of me is either to text me from the number that is on the website, or just message me on Twitter.
I feel like we have unfinished business. I feel like we need to talk again soon. So, all the best. You guys done harvest yet?
No, we've got flax and soybeans and a couple intercrop trial left, and chickpeas and things like that. So we're on the home stretch, over 70% done.
Great. Well, good luck with the rest of that. Have a safe finish to the harvest, and God bless researchers and all they're doing. I think and I love this idea of viral ideas, and I think it's coming. I think we're getting better. I think we're good, but we're getting better, and I appreciate the work that you do. So keep up the good work.
Thanks. Well, Maya Angelou said something about when we know better, we do better, and agriculture has pretty much always done that. There's never been a time where we didn't figure out something better and then do better. So I just try to keep doing that.
We're on the right path. Thanks, Lana.
Yeah. Thanks.